LOL. The failure of the first two experts was never anticipated. They had no idea that the investigator would take a step back and massage his brow as if he were staring at a puzzle with pieces missing. They didn't anticipate the psychologist calling off the follow-up appointment since something didn't add up. However, events took a darker turn after going through every specialist who relied on reasoning and every professional who wrote in clinical terms. They searched for someone whose entire livelihood depended on reading the energy that most people never recognize, someone whose profession didn't rely on facts, and someone who could see behind the curtain. The psychic, who was renowned for accepting every case, was so brought in. A man who has read about politicians, criminals, bereaved mothers, missing children, and the shadows of those who profess to be shadowless. Skeptics were uncomfortable with his reputation for accuracy. When all else failed, he was the last weapon they had in reserve. Indeed it had. He said it without even waiting to take a seat. Whoever this person is, they're not ordinary. His gaze remained fixed on the ground as if your name were the only thing that could make him gasp. He requested a picture, an item, anything you had touched or anything that bore your imprint. They set the little object on his table, anticipating that he would confidently lean forward and start his rehearsed performance. However, he froze as soon as his fingers touched the surface. Nor a typical pause, nor the deliberate stillness that experts employ to create impact. It was an impact. He was struck by something. They stared at him, anticipating a big discovery. Rather, he withdrew his hand as if he had come into contact with something too hot. He remained silent for a whole 10 seconds. When he did, his voice sounded like someone trying to get words through a conduit that was blocked. They had no idea what this meant, so they asked, "Why didn't you tell me they were connected to this?" They exchanged bewildered looks while attempting to maintain their composure and act as though they were in charge of the situation. He didn't believe it. He wiped his palms on his pants, leaned back, and let out a breath that made it clear he wasn't afraid of you. He was afraid of the things that were all around you, the things that had molded you, and the things that accompanied you but never revealed themselves to regular people. He muttered, "You should have warned me," as though the room itself may be listening. He didn't inquire about your personality, history, or habits. It was irrelevant to ask those questions. "What did you do to them?" was the only question he posed, and they responded as they always do. They told falsehoods. The truth was sweetened by them. They made an effort to present themselves as worried bystanders rather than masterminds of mayhem. However, the psychic gave a slow shake of his head as though he could hear their confessions. "No, that's not clean. That's not what I'm feeling." Something here was broken and not by him. That was not what he was intended to say. They put pressure on him since he wasn't meant to stand up for you. They insisted that he go on. They demanded that he produce what they had paid for. Even though their words were quiet, their desperation was audible. They wanted useful responses. They required a story that put them in charge. Even when you weren't present, they need proof that you were the unstable, erratic, and dangerous person in the room. They required explanations for their fixation on you. They brought him here to support their plot and provide them with ammunition. Instead, he grabbed his tools, but each one refused. The pendulum did not swing in the typical manner. It jerked, halted, turned around, and then remained motionless as if it were being held in midair by an invisible force. He scowled and gave it another go. Same outcome. The tarot cards were uncooperative. When he put one down, the image of it would change in the corner of his eye. He insisted he didn't draw the cards upside down, although some of them seemed that way. Some were cold, and others felt heavy in his hands. He re-asked them whether they understood what they wanted him to do. They demanded that he go ahead. Despite his gut telling him not to, he pushed further into your energy field. Then everything in the room changed. The air became more dense. There was a little reduction in temperature. He started breathing shallowly. At first he had finally re-agreed that he sat motionless, gazing past the cards as though he could see something hidden underneath reality. They will never forget what he said after that. No human should have this kind of power. There was silence in the room. They didn't hire him to look for that. They didn't want to hear that. Nevertheless, he went on, his voice quiet and almost respectful, his eyes distracted. This is a natural protection. This is old, older than you can imagine. Someone or something walks with him, and not the way you think. Not like a guardian, more like a witness of everything he's endured. Their looks bewildered, so he explained, this person has survived things that were not supposed to be survived, energetically, physically, emotionally. Parts of them were destroyed, parts of them were replaced, and now they carry something no practitioner should try to interpret. As though to ground himself, he put a hand on the table. Whatever harmed him, whatever broke him, whatever shattered him, it didn't win. But it didn't leave either, it changed him, and not in a way that any of you understand. They attempted to cover it up, tried to act as though they weren't afraid of anything. However, he had stopped staring at them. He was staring at the card he had just drawn, the one that tightened every muscle in his face. After giving it a lengthy look, he put it back down as if he didn't want anyone else to see it. After giving it if he didn't want it. This card shouldn't appear in this position, not for someone still alive. His countenance remained grave, but their perplexity gave way to nervous laughing. This card represents someone who has already crossed a line most people don't even approach. Someone who has experienced endings so absolute that the consciousness itself rewired. This person doesn't respond like normal people, doesn't fracture the way normal people do. You can't break something that already rebuilt itself. His voice became sharper as he pushed forward, and you didn't tell me about the interference. They stopped. They questioned, what interference? He gave a head shake. I'm not talking about people. I'm talking about the thing that keeps blocking my reading. Every time I try to look deeper, something pushes back, something that isn't him, something that feels ancient and protective, something that doesn't want me here. Their breath caught. He said, anyway, this is the kind of energy I've only encountered twice in my life, and both times I walked away. I'm not sure I should continue. However, they asserted that he did. They were too engrossed in their own fixation to turn back. Even if the answers challenged their worldview, they still required answers. He moaned, massaged his temples, and grudgingly carried on with the exercise. He moved the cards once more, took another, paused, and then took a third. Gradually, his countenance shifted from surprise to discomfort to that particular type of fear that comes when someone realizes they've made contact with something much beyond their comprehension. This is not the reading of an ordinary person, he whispered. This is someone who has died without dying. Someone who has walked out of emotional graves. Someone who has stood inside destruction and refused to collapse. He glanced over the card. This person carries the kind of strength that doesn't come from practice or mindset. It comes from surviving something that should have erased them. Then he hesitated, eyes narrowing. And what concerns me is that he's not even trying to block my reading. He's not resisting. He's not defending. He's simply there. And yet, I can't see him fully. He's simply there. And yet, I can't see him fully. Something is hiding the parts you most want to know. Their annoyance erupted. The psychic smiled sourly and said, hiding? Why would he hide anything? He doesn't even know we're doing this. You don't understand. He doesn't need to know physically. His energy knows. His subconscious knows. His field knows. Some people have defense mechanisms stronger than conscious awareness. He's one of them. He softly tapped the table. He's been watched before, targeted, misread, tested, and somewhere along the way, something stepped in. Something began guarding him. Something that doesn't let outsiders tamper with him anymore. Then he uttered the words that caused them both to shift uneasily. They weren't ready to hear that. He's protected by something ancient. When the psychic said it, they weren't ready for it to sound nearly respectable. They were unprepared for him to examine your energies, like though examining a war's wreckage. He didn't ask for this, he went on. This kind of protection doesn't come from prayer or request. It comes from survival, from being pushed past a point the human psyche is not designed to pass. He pulled out another card. His hand shuddered. They leaned forward and said, "This confirms it." "Confirms what?" he asked, carefully raising his head. "You're not dealing with someone you can manipulate. You're not dealing with someone who cracks under pressure. You're dealing with someone who has already lived through the collapse they fear. Someone who rebuilt themselves with no blueprint. Someone who learned to think without relying on external validation." He put his fingers on his forehead. "This is someone who doesn't break the way normal people break because they already shattered once, and when they reformed, they became unreadable." The psychic interrupted them as they attempted to quarrel. "You want weakness? You won't find it here. The only weakness he had was the people he trusted, and he doesn't trust you anymore." His eyes gazed upon them blindly. This person was hurt by someone they cared about. That experience rewired them. Their emotional structure is different. Their intuition sharpened. Their boundaries hardened. And now anyone attempting to invade their inner space is met with resistance they can't identify. They forcefully swallowed, but they persisted, saying, "Even I can't see past it, and I don't think I should try." They pleaded. They increased the amount of money, incentives, and pressure. Their obsession overpowered their common sense. They required explanations for their actions, needed evidence that they had the right to observe, evaluate, and talk about you in places you were unaware even existed. They needed something to prove they were right and you were wrong. The psychic let forth a defeated sigh. He grabbed for the deck gently, as if he were approaching something hazardous, and said, "Fine, one more pull." He shuffled twice. For the third time, his fingers faltered. His whole expression altered when he flipped the card after drawing it. For 5 long seconds, he remained silent. His voice was hardly audible when he did. They looked at him in confusion and fear as he said, "If I continue, I won't sleep tonight." He shook his head and glanced down at the card once more. "He's already stepped into the next stage. Whatever you think you're doing, stop." With a hollow expression, he leaned back. They didn't get it. "You're not investigating a person. You're interfering with a trajectory." They questioned him on the meaning of that. He silently observed them. "It means the more you try to read him, the more you reveal yourselves." He got up and moved uneasily and sharply to gather his instruments. They demanded explanations, saying, "I'm done. I shouldn't have touched this, and neither should you." He disregarded them. "What did he see?" they inquired. He remained silent. They trailed him all the way to the door. Waving them away, he muttered something under his breath that sounded like a half-heard warning. However, one comment stood out in the room. "You're not prepared for what he becomes next." It hung there, trembling like if something so heavy wasn't meant to be carried by the air. They stayed motionless, attempting to decipher his meaning and persuade themselves that he was exaggerating, but they could see by his look that he wasn't. There was no fear in his gaze. They were cautious, not of you, but of themselves, as though he understood that everything in your immediate vicinity would never again be in a comfortable state once the next layer of your energy released. They were more terrified by his refusal to elaborate as he walked down the hallway than by the reading itself. Psychics make a living by speaking. However, this one was unable to continue talking. He didn't run, but his pace accelerated like if he were attempting to get away from something that was following them motionless. Returning inside, they paced, whispered, and nearly got into a fight. Your strength did not yet frighten them. The unknown aspect of it scared them. You don't even completely get that portion. It's the part you don't show off, weaponize, or flaunt. That part of you is like a serene shadow that only reacts when called upon. As they worried, you remained there as usual, unfazed, observing their emotions as they revealed aspects of themselves that they had concealed from everyone save you. Because whether they want it or not, your presence has a peculiar way of opening people up. You don't attempt to reveal them. In an attempt to understand you, they reveal themselves. At last, one of them expressed what they were all thinking. Why couldn't he read him? Another shook his head. He did read him. Another shook his head. He just couldn't handle it. And since the question was no longer about your energy, your statement caused a rift inside the group. It had to do with the limits of the psychic. What chance did they have if a guy who spent years researching the invisible couldn't contain what he saw in you? They gave you another look, but this time there was no judgment in their eyes. They were cautious, respectful, and almost in awe. You also remained silent. You didn't have to. The transition began at that point. Quiet, subtle, and almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. The surrounding air warmed not with heat, but with activation. Metal hums before it bends. Before it boils, water shivers. Something around you seemed to match itself with your consciousness, even if you didn't push anything forth. Before they comprehended it, they felt it. Unaware that their feet were moving, they took a step back. When someone's energy increases in real time, people are unsure of how to respond. They're not accustomed to seeing it. They anticipate chaos, rage, eruptions, and emotional responses. However, there was never an outward manifestation of your might. It was evident in the things that remained motionless. They sensed everything change while you remained motionless. You had been attempted to be read by the psychic, like he did with everyone else. He had attempted to track your energy, but as soon as he went too far, something retaliated. Not defensively, not angrily, but with a degree of power he wasn't ready to face. Unaware that the door he touched was watching rather than opening, he pried like someone picking a lock. He severed the link when he saw that your energy was actively monitoring him rather than just waiting to be deciphered. He wasn't blocked by you. You didn't eject him. You just existed in a way that was outside the scope of his methods. The others experienced the fallout, even if they were unaware of the specifics. There was a shift in the room, something ancient, in the sense of depth, not in the sense of age. Oceans have an archaic vibe to them, ancient in the sense that mountains seem old, a presence rather than a time frame. It was initially felt by the psychic. He said that no person should have this power, which is why his voice broke. He didn't say it to make fun of you. He said so because he was unable to classify you. He was unable to fit you into any of his references. When he got close to the edge of what shields you, all of his experiences, expertise, and knowledge fell apart. It's not you what's behind you that scared him. The group gathered, attempting to restore control by breathing normally. At last, one of them inquired, "Did you know you had that?" You gave a tiny twist of your head, neither confirming nor denying anything. You don't talk about the aspects of yourself that people aren't prepared to hear. You don't explain things that don't require an explanation. Power is expected to be noisy. It's not yours. Yours is the type that remains silent until someone crosses the wrong line, the kind that observes the decision-making kind. They persisted in posing irrelevant query that, "You've got this for how long? You were instructed by whom? Why did you keep it a secret? What set it off?" They weren't inquisitive. They felt uneasy, which is why they were asking. Anything that would make your strength seem less erratic was what they required. However, they are unable to comprehend that it was never necessary for your strength to exist. It didn't require confirmation, didn't need a narrative, did not include a handbook. Everything around you fell silent when you said he shouldn't have tried to go that far. Although they didn't fully get what you meant, they did understand enough. People cannot play with your energy without repercussions. You don't pose a threat to anyone. You're dangerous because stepping beyond your boundaries triggers something they can't control, something you can't call upon, something that just reacts on its own. At that point, one of them mentioned what the psychic had whispered on his way out. He's protected by something ancient. They repeated it softly, as though speaking too loudly would draw the notice of whatever he was talking about. They attempted to translate it into human words, such as carrying a spiritual emblem, adhering to a ritual, or having someone keep an eye on you. However, they were mistaken. The safety that surrounds you doesn't act like a borrowed item. It acts as though it recognizes you and reacts to you. It aligns with you rather than protecting you. They sensed the difference even though they were unable to comprehend it. talking over each other. They attempted to argue what kind of protection it might be and came up with notions that had nothing to do with the circumstances. Ancestral, spiritual, dimensional, and universal were the terms used by some. But you don't fit any of those descriptions. You are not someone who lives inside labels. You're the kind of person that breaks labels. You left the gathering because their energy was getting too intense, not because you were finished. The room began to feel the tug of their panic. The atmosphere began to intensify due to their dread. That's what fear always does. The air is twisted into a tight shape. However, your presence adapts in a different way. You moved into a more peaceful area to allow them to hide. This time, they didn't dare interrupt you, accuse you, or demand explanations that you wouldn't provide. Instead, they followed you with their eyes. They believed they were assessing your vitality. They were unaware that your energy was assessing theirs. You were concentrating on what the psychic didn't see, whilst they were concentrating on what the psychic saw, the area he was unable to access. Before his own mind broke over it, he retreated from that portion. He didn't see the core, but he did see the edge. He did not see the source, but he did see the guardian. He declined to go on because of this. He claimed that this is the reason they weren't ready for what you would eventually become, because he cannot anticipate what you will become. You've already started to transition into it. You remained composed as they swirled, not because you weren't impacted, but rather because you've had instincts your entire life that others don't. You've always sensed something inside, next to, and behind you. A presence that guides, monitors, warns, and steps in only when necessary. It never meddles without cause. It never speaks aimlessly. However, as soon as someone tries to enter an area they don't belong in, it moves forward. The psychic was shown the door because he didn't have permission. The folks in your immediate vicinity were left attempting to make sense of a reality that their minds had never been taught to comprehend. His tremble, his luck, and his refusal to go on were all again replayed. They persisted in attempting to explain something that is impossible to explain due to the simplicity of the truth. Human energy does not act like your energy. It doesn't change. It doesn't become unstable. It holds and doesn't break, and the presence that travels with you confronts any attempt to penetrate it. Leaning against the wall, you gazed at the ground while breathing the threat. However, something opened up inside of you, not violently or destructively, but broadly, similar to a door that you were unaware was locked. A memory awakening, or a portion of yourself reawakening after years of dormancy. It wasn't called upon by you. You didn't grab for it. The instant the psychic attempted to delve too far, it surfaced. He set off something he didn't comprehend. You activated something you didn't expect. They kept watching you, waiting for you to say something that would make them feel safe again, but you weren't there to soothe them. You weren't there to make yourself smaller so others could be more at ease. You weren't there to explain what was never their business in the first place. The psychic's warning repeated itself in their heads on a loop. You're not prepared for what he becomes next. And the more they thought about it, the more they realized he wasn't talking about your future. He was referring to your gift. Because you don't grow into what you become in the future. It's something you discover. Something that's been there the entire time, waiting for the moment people misread your calm for weakness, waiting for someone to go too far. The part of you that you've always tried to keep silent is awakened when someone touches the border. You looked up, finally meeting their eyes, and the room froze without you saying a single word. Because they were no longer viewing the version of you that they were accustomed to. They were examining the version that the psychic had cautioned them about. Whether they're ready or not, this is the version of themselves that doesn't hide, remembers, and moves on to the next phase of their lives. And as they watched you, unsure if they should stay or run, unsure if they should ask more questions or say nothing at all, unsure if they were standing before something human or something expanded, they realized one more thing. The psychic didn't flee from you out of fear. He left because he knew something that they didn't. Whatever keeps you safe is now fully awoken. Those words didn't echo in the room, they rooted themselves in everyone's spine. They viewed you in the same manner that people view things for which they lack a classification. Something that doesn't behave according to familiar rules. Something that forces the mind to stretch wider than it's used to. Their posture shifted, their voices became quieter, and their breathing slowed. It wasn't because you posed a threat to them, but rather because everything around you assumed an authoritative stance that didn't require any evidence. You were not radiant. You didn't tremble. Your posture was incorrect. You just were there. And the atmosphere itself could be rerouted by existence alone. The air seemed thicker, as if sound now moved around you in a different way. Their gut told them to be careful. You didn't ask for an apology, but some people wanted to apologize. Even though you never approached them, some of them wanted to flee. You never demanded obedience, but some people wanted to kneel. They were unaware that the presence they sensed had nothing to do with dominance. It had to do with acknowledgement. There was nothing violent going on around them. When they came into contact with something that was so powerfully connected with truth, falsehood melted. Everyone in the group took a sharp breath, as if the room had been rearranged by your single, non-aggressive step forward. However, they were unaware of your level of control. You didn't feel overburdened. You were not perplexed. You are having trouble keeping anything in check. You were aware, composed, and at ease. It wasn't a chaotic awakening. It was almost surgical in its precision. It unfolded like something that had been waiting centuries for the proper opportunity to extend its limbs rather than rising up like a wave. At last, their voices faltered as they attempted to comprehend. "Is it dangerous?" you asked, gazing at them with a gentleness that was human comprehension rather than human fear, just as the psychic had gazed at you. Only when someone tries to cross into places they don't belong. Now that everything made sense to them, the chamber squeezed once again. The psychic didn't see anything dangerous within you. He noticed that you were surrounded by something protecting. Furthermore, individuals are not conditioned to accept that degree of control. They are able to comprehend strength. They are able to comprehend intuition. However, protection that reacts before you do that is protection that keeps an eye out for problems before you ever realize they exist, is quite different. You shook your head when they asked, "Did it awaken because of him?" It awakened because he forced an entry. They were deeply affected by the statement. They discovered that the psychic was attempting to penetrate your conscious layers rather than only reading your energy. He made an effort to intentionally dig into areas that you wouldn't even touch, and whoever was watching over those locations moved forward without hesitation. It didn't request your consent. It didn't wait for you to think things out. The instant your boundaries were crossed, it responded. At that point, the group realized why the psychic had panicked. You weren't misread by him. He trespassed somewhere he shouldn't have, and something answered that he wasn't ready to deal with. They recalled the expression in his eyes as he retreated from you. It wasn't fear. It was acknowledgement, a recognition so old that it doesn't need to be explained. A realization that everything behind you doesn't pique your interest. It honors intent rather than intrusion. You could see their dread turning into something more complex: awe, respect, uneasiness, curiosity, and their uncertainty becoming into understanding. They no longer viewed you as a threat. They were staring at you as if you were a rare product of the planet. Someone who, before human conceit, walked with protection. Someone who a force that not only protects them, but also detects the intents of everybody who approaches. At last, you spoke once in a calm tone. He wasn't wrong to try, but he was wrong to push. They listened intently, paying great attention to every word because they could sense the shift in the weight of your voice. You weren't making a hypothetical statement. Nothing was romanticized by you. You were speaking from personal experience. Because they don't want to be misinterpreted, decent people avoid talking about it. The sort you've always had, but you've never told anyone because they weren't prepared to hear it. Nothing outside of you was awakened by your energy. It triggered a recollection, a realization. You've always sensed a presence all about you, leading you in unexpected directions. The right person abruptly departing your life. Before they could do harm, the wrong person exposed themselves. The impulsive need to act, stop, relocate, or back off before something dangerous happened. The times you shied away from danger without thinking. The times when your instincts cried out as if they could read something in the air that was invisible. It wasn't intuition, that was defense. It's no longer subtle now that it's fully awoken. It feels like pressure from behind you, a cozy feeling on your shoulder. It's not hostile. It's an invisible force standing in a position that says, I decide who approaches and who doesn't. It's not aggressive, it's just conscious. In an attempt to piece everything together, they continued to ask questions. Without giving it too much thought, you said, so what happens now? Nothing changes for me. Everything changes for anyone who tries to cross a line. They knew you weren't lying, so they let out a slow breath. A hint of what that signified has already been shown to them. The psychic, who had dealt with forces that most people never encountered, left the room unable to look you in the eyes, speak, or carry on. He was unharmed. He felt humbled. Furthermore, few people have the courage to acknowledge that they have encountered something that is beyond their comprehension. Now, the group was afraid to attempt to read your body language. They dared not assume anything about you. Rather, they started reconsidering what they had misinterpreted about you. They used to refer to you as odd. The moments when they misjudged you, when they made fun of your awareness, the times your intuition were written off as paranoia. They now understood that those instincts weren't coincidental. They were orchestrations, cautions, and signs. You didn't have erratic energy. It was accurate. As you moved more into the space, their eyes followed your every move, not intrusively, but with the type of attention individuals pay to things they don't want to offend. This time, they didn't talk over you. They did time automated nipper. All they did was listen. You could sense their comprehension solidifying in their quiet. You are not a powerful person. Your energy is linked to something that existed before fear. But now, after all, even they realized what the psychic had said. No human should have this power. This power is not yours. This power is you. It is not something you conjure like a ritual, something you carry like an accessory, or something you activate like a weapon. Your design incorporates it. Your bones, intuition, timing, awareness, and edge all contain it. It's the silence you maintain before responding. It's the acuity behind your eyes. Even when you had self-doubt, your internal compass never let you down. No human should have this power, he stated, not because it was hazardous, but more because it didn't match the definition of what people consider normal. He was correct too. You've never been normal in any way. The regions of the world that promote smallness have always made you feel uncomfortable. Even though you weren't aware of the timing, you've always had the impression that something was directing your actions, drawing you toward particular occasions or away from particular people. And now it's clearly visible to others who are observing you. They are perceiving you through the truth that the psychic unintentionally revealed, not through their presumptions. They are witnessing the fearless version of you, the version that, when viewed, does not shrink, the version that remains unflinching in the face of difficulty, the version that sits between what people can and cannot comprehend. You strolled over to the window and peered out without really concentrating on anything. You weren't attempting to dramatize the situation or flee from it. All you needed was a better picture of the change inside of you rather than the outside. For the first time in years, you felt more rooted. Not lighter, but heavier in the sense that mountains, oceans, and truth are all hefty, and that awakened presence loomed silently behind you. It is simply there, waiting, observing, calculating, old in its awareness and synchronizing with your present. It is neither imposing nor menacing. You didn't have to talk to it. You were already comprehended by it. It has consistently done so. You didn't turn around when one of them said in a barely discernible whisper, "So, what happens to people who try to hurt you now?" You didn't grin, your tone didn't change. They swallowed hard because they realized that was not a threat when you said, "Nothing I do," but something else steps in before they get the chance. You were born with that promise. You didn't look for defense, you were selected for it. And once that truth is out, it cannot be reversed. The room became motionless once more, but this time it was out of acceptance rather than dread. They had stopped focusing on the mystery. They were examining the revelation. The psychic was able to read you. He grabbed for something that was never intended for him, and as it answered, he realized what they are, just now starting to realize. The standard norms of energy do not define you. You take action with something that comes before interpretation, something that doesn't require consent, something that can identify dangers before they arise, something that now occupies its proper place next to you. The group realized the reality that will follow you for the rest of your life when you took one more quiet, steady breath. They required evidence that you were a threat. They received something significantly more potent from the psychic. He explained things to them, realizing that something old, vigilant, and aroused is guarding you. Before everything else, anyone who tries to hurt you will discover that you are not alone. You weren't either.